Do you want to be the ultimate Mage Slayer, but also defend yourself and your allies from magic? Do you want to be the best at counterspelling? Do you want to be able to dispel any magical effect as a bonus action? Well, sit back and get comfy, and I'm going to explain to you the ultimate anti-mage build. Hey guys, it's Wonders, and I'm back with another build video for you today. So yes, if you were unsure before, this is definitely going to be mostly an Abjuration Wizard build, or as it's known in the 2024 Player's Handbook, the Abjurer Wizard. And I really like the Abjurer Wizard, especially compared to its 2014 counterpart. If you don't look too closely, it seems almost the same, but as you sift through the finer details, you'll notice a lot of big differences. Not only that, but the Mage Slayer feat has been buffed, and Counterspell has actually been nerfed. So making this build with the new rules required a bit of decision making. Not only that, the Abjurer Wizard, even though it is very effective at being a counter to magic, it does have some weaknesses. So I will be multiclassing a little bit to try to cover those weaknesses the best I can. Also, there's a couple of older species options, i.e. the Satyr and the Yuan-Ti, that I will not be using, but these are arguably the best species options for this build. But I feel like having magic resistance is something that they probably won't include in the 2024 rules when these species are redone. I could be wrong. And because of how the 2024 rules interact with the old rules, these are 100% usable species options in the current version of the game. So I made a gnome character last week, and that was mostly for thematic purposes. I'm going to be going with the gnome again, but this time I'm going to be going with the Forest Gnome. Gnomes get a great feature, which is kind of similar to magic resistance, but instead of having advantage on all saving throws against spells, you have advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws, which is different. For example, a lot of spells require you to make dex saves, con saves, strength saves. So this is only the 3 mental saves. But later on in Abjuration Wizard, you're gonna get something even better than magic resistance. So I feel like going with the gnome mental stat advantage feels pretty nice. As a Forest Gnome versus the Rock Gnome, the main difference is instead of getting Prestidigitation and the Mending cantrip, instead you get Minor Illusion. You also get to cast Speak with Animals a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus without using a spell slot. This isn't super important to the build or anything, but it just kind of brings some variety to my builds, and the Rock Gnome abilities aren't any better. So yeah, we're going to be picking Intelligence as the casting stat for Speak with Animals and Minor Illusion. I don't really know if that affects much, but yeah. Because of the multiclassing I'm doing, this is definitely going to be a mad build, meaning multiple ability score dependent. And I even made it a little more mad than I usually would. And this is mostly because the fact that spells can be any saving throw, I didn't want to have any negative stats. So the stats I want to increase are charisma and intelligence. And as far as I know, there isn't a charisma and intelligence background that has the feat I would like, but this origin feat is not super important to the build. I think it's helpful for sure. So if your DM doesn't allow you to take custom backgrounds, just pick whatever feat can give you an intelligence and charisma boost and pick that feat. But the feat I'm going to be going with for my origin feat is the alert feat. This is mostly because when it comes to fighting spellcasters, going first and getting your magic effect off is often really important. Not only that, but with how the new alert feat works, if one of my party members gets a better initiative than me, or if I want one of my party members to go before me, we can choose to switch, which is super helpful because maybe my fighter is really close to the caster and they can just wallop on him, and I want them to go first, you know? So for ability scores, I have a 10 strength, a 13 dex, a 12 constitution, a 15 intelligence, but I put 2 in intelligence to make it a 17, a 10 wisdom, and a 13 charisma, but I put 1 into charisma to make it a 14. And then this is gonna be mostly a wizard build, but to start, I'm actually gonna be going into sorcerer. And I actually did a poll recently asking people what are some underrated few level dips, and I put sorcerer on there, and it actually did really well. I think it won. I'll double check. People keep voting on it. But what I found interesting is people mentioned in the comments why Sorcerer is a really good few level dip. And the main reason I'm taking it wasn't mentioned in the comments. So yes, of course, you get Constitution saving throw proficiency, but you can get that with Fighter as well. And then you do get innate sorcery, but innate sorcery only works with sorcerer spells. So if you're casting wizard spells, innate sorcery isn't going to help at all. And we are going to mostly be casting wizard spells, so we're probably not going to use innate sorcery at all in this build. I'll get to it later, but we're going to be taking more than one level into sorcerer, but very quickly at level 2, we're going to be taking another multi-class, and it's going to be fighter. This is for many reasons. First of all, our strength is never going to be high enough to take advantage of heavy armor. So that's why we went with sorcerer first instead of fighter, because the highest armor we can wear anyway is going to be medium armor. And then what we really wanted is shields. And the other classes that offer shields for us would be either barbarian, ranger, or paladin. Paladin has a strength requirement that we're not meeting. Barbarian uses rage, which isn't going to be helpful for this build. And ranger has a wisdom requirement that we do not meet. So fighter it is. We do get a few weapon masteries from fighter, which is nice to have. And even though we're not going to get extra attack in this build, True Strike is such a good cantrip. And when you combine True Strike with weapon masteries, it's like a might as well situation. So we're mostly going to be using the hand crossbow because we're going to be wielding a shield. And being someone fighting mages, we probably want to have at least somewhat of a ranged option. Again, we'll have access to regular cantrips as well. So if something's really far away, we can obviously use just a regular cantrip. But we're going to be getting Vex from the hand crossbow, which is nice. Get advantage on our next attack. But then we might as well take Trident and we might as well take Longsword. This is also because we're planning to use True Strike, and True Strike uses our casting stat. So it doesn't matter if we're using a dex or a strength weapon. We're going to be using our intelligence for the attacks made with these weapons. And then for the next 4 levels, we're going to be going straight into Wizard. And at 5th level, we're going to be going into Abjuration Wizard, or the Abjurer Wizard, as it's known in the 2024 rules. And level 6, we're going to get the Mage Slayer feat. I'm going to switch over to D&D Beyond just so that I can show you guys more of these details and be able to talk about it in a more detailed manner while reading things out. So let's go to D&D Beyond. Hey guys, go ahead and check out dnddice.com/comrade. They make great, amazing thematic dice like these. And I'm actually a part of their affiliate program. So for every $1 you spend, I make 25 cents. As long as you type in dnddice.com/comrade or use my affiliate link down below. That's all. Thank you guys so much. Going back to the video. For sorcerer traits, that deception insight might be fitting. I also forgot to mention for the background, I went Arcana and Stealth. Arcana I feel like is obvious. If you want to defeat magic, you should probably understand it, you know? And then as far as sorcerer spells, I went with all spells that don't require casting stat to be very high. And then I went with Fog Cloud and Magic Missile. Fog Cloud is very good at lower levels, and I feel like Fog Cloud is a good way to sort of hide yourself and your allies from line of sight in case there's a spellcaster very far away from you all. And then Magic Missile, of course, automatically hits unless they have shield, of course. Might as well pick it up on the class that we're not going to raise the casting stat up too high. And then Fighter, like I said already, Trident, Hand Crossbow, and Longsword for weapon masteries. And I forgot to mention earlier, we're going to be taking the archery fighting style. Again, even though True Strike uses our casting stat, archery still benefits as well from it. So it's nice. It'll make it so that we can hit very easily with our hand crossbow most of the time. And then Wizard right at level 1, we get spellcasting, we get Ritual Adept, which is great. Any ritual spells we can cast even if they aren't prepared, as long as they're in our spell book. And then Arcane Recovery is great. Basically, we can get a certain number of spell slots back on short rests, which is very nice. And then Scholar, we basically get to add expertise to a skill we are proficient in. And just like earlier I mentioned Arcana, we're definitely going to go Arcana. It's great to have expertise in Arcana, especially because our intelligence will be very high. We're going to be able to understand magic very well. Then like I said, we're going to go with the Abjurer for our level 3 wizard. And Abjuration Savant, this is way better than the old Abjuration feature. Basically, if you found a spell scroll or a spell book that had abjuration spells in it, you would pay half the cost and use half the materials I think it would even take half the time to put it into your spell book. So now you get to learn 2 extra spells for free at level 3. And every time you gain access to new spell levels, so for example, at level 5, you gain access to 3rd level spells, you get another free abjuration spell. Normally, every time you level up, you get access to 2 new free wizard spells. And so basically you just get a little bit more, which is nice. And then Arcane Ward, you also get a level 3. This ability is really good and it has been buffed. I'll read it. Arcane Ward, you can weave magic around yourself for protection when you cast an abjuration spell with a spell slot. You can simultaneously use a strand of the spell's magic to create a magic ward on yourself that lasts until you finish a long rest. The ward has a hit point maximum equal to twice your wizard level plus your intelligence modifier. Whenever you take damage, the ward takes the damage instead, and if you have any resistances or vulnerabilities, apply them before reducing the ward's hit points. If the damage reduces the ward to 0 hit points, you take any remaining damage while the ward has 0 hit points. It can't absorb damage, but its magic remains. Whenever you cast an abjuration spell with the spell slot, the ward regains a number of hit points equal to twice the level of the spell slot. Alternatively, as a bonus action, you can expend a spell slot, and the ward regains a number of hit points equal to twice the level of the spell slot expended. Once you create the ward, you can't create it again until you finish a long rest. So yeah, basically you get a magical ward, and it works kind of like temporary hit points, but one of the differences is, for example, with temporary hit points, if you get hit, you still have to make a Constitution saving throw to maintain concentration on a spell, but as long as the damage doesn't actually get to you with the arcane ward, you won't have to make Constitution saving throws. Also, previously you did not get to add your resistances or vulnerabilities, but now you can. So for example, if you're resistant to fire damage, the ward is also resistant to fire damage. Also, when you use it at the beginning of the day, it automatically has its maximum hit points, which is your wizard level plus twice your intelligence modifier. And then when you cast an abjuration spell, it goes up by twice the spell's level, but also you can just, as a bonus action, use the spell slot to do the same thing. So you don't have to cast an abjuration spell to add hit points to this. Also, even if it's knocked to 0 hit points, the ward is still active. Basically, it doesn't ever go away. You can keep adding hit points to it throughout the day. And it does say once you create the ward, you can't create it again until you finish a long rest. But the only reason this is there is to basically say you can't use it again to automatically make it its max hit points. When you first use it at the beginning of the day, it's maximum hit points. And then the only way to make it gain hit points is to use spell slots. And it'll only go up by double the spell slot's level, if that makes sense. So I cast shield, boom, 2 points are added. If I use a first level spell slot, 2 hit points are added. If I use a 5th level spell slot, 10 hit points are added, but it can't go past the maximum. And then at level 4 wizard, level 6 character, we take the Mage Slayer feat. And now I need to discuss the Mage Slayer feat because it has a decent amount of changes. First of all, you increase your strength or dexterity score by 1. We're gonna increase our dexterity score. This is also great because this makes our dexterity 14. So we now have a +2 dex, which helps with our AC. Also helps with our dex saving throws. And now we have concentration breaker. When you damage a creature that is concentrating, it has disadvantage on the saving throw it makes to maintain concentration. This was in the original feat as well, but now there's also guarded mind. If you fail an intelligence, a wisdom, or charisma saving throw, you can cause yourself to succeed instead. Once you use this benefit, you can't use it again until you finish a short or long rest. So here at level 6, not only do we have advantage on our intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws, but also if we fail once per short and long rest, we can just succeed. We essentially get a free legendary resistance, but only for intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. But in my opinion, those are the important ones. This is nice too, because the original Mage Slayer just gave you advantage on saving throws only when you were within 5 feet of the caster. It worked all the time, but we can already get that effect for the most part from Gnome. Also, pay attention to concentration breaker. It says when you damage a creature. This doesn't say melee attack. This also doesn't even say attack. And I didn't end up going into this, but this is something to keep in mind though. Concentration breaker specifically says when you damage a creature. It doesn't say when you hit. A lot of abilities like this specifically say when you hit a creature. So if you don't want to go the Abjuration Wizard route, the Evocation Wizard actually could be a pretty good anti-mage, because even if they miss with their cantrip, the cantrips still do half damage and the creature will still have to make a Constitution saving throw at disadvantage. especially at low levels where casters' con saves are actually pretty low. An Evocation Wizard with the Mage Slayer feat might be pretty decent at ending concentration. Also, the Gray's Weapon Mastery for a strength build could also be a very viable thing to use Mage Slayer with. I could see a Warlock with a Greatsword. That could be very effective at being an anti-mage. Now I want to talk to you about the spells for the wizard. This is going to be very important to these breakdowns, especially because the wizard has so many spells, and this isn't necessarily a DPR build. This isn't a damage build. This is a specifically fighting a specific type of creature build. So I'm going to pick Acid Splash. This is mostly because this cantrip can hit up to 4 targets, technically, if they're within 5-foot radius of each other. Firebolt, just because it's the highest damage cantrip available for a wizard. Mind Sliver, this is going to be very good for when you really want a creature to fail a saving throw, which you'll want to happen a lot of the times, especially when you're fighting another caster. You can, do some psychic damage and then also subtract a d4 from their next saving throw. And then True Strike. This is going to be the main cantrip we use for damage. At least for the DPR, I could see using Mind Sliver more often if you're doing those big spells that debilitate creatures. And then for these low levels, at least, you want to take Witch Bolt. Witch Bolt is just really good at low levels, and it's a solid pick for this build. And then Hold Person is also just great. In my experience, it's more likely you're going to be fighting humanoids at lower levels. And then Magic Weapon. Magic Weapon, I talk about this spell a lot in my builds. It's not as important in this build because we're not going to be making that many weapon attacks, but with True Strike and the archery fighting style, that hand crossbow is going to have a really high hit chance, and it will make it so your next attack roll is at advantage. Might as well get Magic Weapon on your hand crossbow so you can get those hits in and make them as high as possible. And then Misty Step is just great for mobility. Now this spell is very interesting, especially with the 2024 rules. So Nistel's Magic Aura. With a touch, you place an illusion on a willing creature or an object that isn't being worn or carried. A creature gains the mask effect below, and an object gains the false aura effect below. The effect lasts for the duration, and if you cast the spell on the same target every day for 30 days, the illusion lasts until dispelled. Mask. Creature. Choose a creature type other than the target's actual type. Spells and other magical effects treat the target as if it were a creature of the chosen type. Ooh, okay, so Mask used to work very differently in the 2014 rules. It used to treat creatures as a different creature for stuff like detect magic, and if they were sensitive, like if a paladin, for example, was using divine sense, you could trick them to say that you're not undead if you're undead, or you're not a fiend if you're a fiend. And it wasn't like super helpful to players, but I've heard some people using it. But this is different. This says choose a creature type other than the target's actual type. Spells and other magical effects treat the target as if it were a creature of the chosen type. I am casting this on my wizard every single day, and I am going to pick Ooze. Why pick Ooze? We don't want to pick Humanoid, because Humanoid has a ton of specific abilities like Hold Person, for example, Charm Person, that affect humanoids. We don't want to pick Fey, Fiend, or Undead, or even Celestial, because there are tons of spells that specifically do things to them, like the protection from good and evil. These wouldn't be that bad because they're probably not going to assume you're any of those types, and they're probably not going to prepare to fight an undead when they're fighting a gnome. You don't want to be a plant because there's spells like Blight that do extra damage to plants. There's similar effects with aberrations. There's not a lot with beasts or monstrosities, but there's a few. If you go with Ooze, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, there is no specific spell or ability that specifically targets oozes. So you're going to be a wizard gnome that is, for all intents and purposes, when it comes to magic affecting you, an ooze. Hold Person won't work on you. Charm Person won't work on you. Anything like that, you are completely immune to. So that's great. And then Scorching Ray. We're definitely taking Scorching Ray, and the main reason we're taking Scorching Ray is it does so many attacks, especially at lower levels. A lot of spellcasters actually don't have that high of a Constitution saving throw. So as long as you can make them make con saves at disadvantage, eventually they're gonna fail. And Scorching Ray is a 2nd level spell, and already at 2nd level, it does 3 fiery rays. And as you upcast it, it adds another ray each time. But just for the sake of it, I also picked up Tasha's Mind Whip. I eventually want to do a whole entire AoE build centered around this spell because I think it's crazy. I think it's so good. First of all, it's an intelligence saving throw, which even though spellcasters often have high intelligence, it's only if they're categorized as wizards. A lot of them are charisma based or wisdom based, or they're not proficient in intelligence saving throws. And you're not going to be fighting spellcasters all the time, so Tasha's Mind Whip is great. It's an intelligence saving throw. It has a 90-foot range. It does 3d6 psychic damage, which is decent, but also the creature, if they fail, they can't take reactions until the end of its next turn, and they have to choose between doing an action, a bonus action, or moving on their next turn. So it's very good at controlling targets, which spellcasters can do a lot of things. So it's nice to be able to control them a bit. And these are just the spells I had prepared. Also, Mirror Image would be great to have. See Invisibility, because, you know, a lot of casters can become invisible. It'd be nice to see them. And then Web is just a great spell in general. Might as well take it at this level. All right, and now for the DPR for level 6. First of all, I'm going to be doing DPR a bit differently, but this build is specifically meant to fight casters. So I decided to specifically find caster stat blocks and fight a specific caster. And even though the new monster manual hasn't come out yet, there is a few stat blocks of casters that are available that will be in the monster manual. We have the Bullywug Bog Sage. I went ahead and used the Bullywug Bog Sage stats for this DPR breakdown. So I'm specifically doing damage to this creature. And then all the other DPR breakdowns, I'm using creatures from the old rules, but there's also the mage stat block, just the standard mage. And I'm gonna analyze the mage stat block. I feel like the mage stat block will help us understand more what future spellcasters will be like. But that all being said, the Bullywug Bog Sage has an AC of 16, and it actually has a +4 Constitution saving throw, which isn't really that high. It has access to Fog Cloud, Grease, Ray of Sickness, and it also can cast Vitriolic Sphere once a day. Unfortunately, we don't have Counterspell yet or anything, and the only spell it could really be concentrating on is Fog Cloud, but Fog Cloud is pretty detrimental, especially at lower levels. So we want to make sure we can do as many attacks as possible, so those con saves will all be made at disadvantage. But we want to open up with Witch Bolt, and Witch Bolt does a lot of damage the first time you cast it as an action, and then it does a small amount of damage that's guaranteed as long as you maintain concentration every turn. So for this 4-round average, we really want to make sure we hit it with Witch Bolt. And because of the archery fighting style and magic weapon, True Strike with a hand crossbow will actually be a +9 to hit. So it's way more likely to hit than our regular spell attacks. And then we have the Vex weapon mastery. So first round, we're just gonna do a True Strike hand crossbow attack, which will do a measly 8.5 damage. But now, going into round 2, because we have advantage on our next attack roll, Witch Bolt will have a 79% chance to hit, and its first initial hit will be doing 23.2 damage on average. And then round 3, we're going to be casting Scorching Ray with our action, and then we're going to be doing a bonus action Witch Bolt, which will automatically do the damage as long as we are within range. It's still in our line of sight, and yada yada, various conditions. And then we're going to be doing the same in round 4. So round 1, True Strike, round 2, Witch Bolt, round 3 and 4, Scorching Ray, and the bonus action Witch Bolt, making our average DPR 17.4 DPR, which is pretty low, but again, we're trying to break concentration on the caster's spells. And actually, based on doing the math with a +4 Constitution saving throw modifier, there's a 43% chance that the Bullywug Bog Sage will drop concentration. On every attack that hits, there's a 43% chance they'll drop concentration. And when they're making 4 to 5 Constitution saving throws per turn with just my character's damage, they're probably going to drop concentration. So yeah, definitely at lower levels, or mostly doing a lot of attacks to end concentration and possibly concentrating on Fog Cloud or Witch Bolt if we're just focused on damage. But yeah, I would say for this low level, we're doing pretty effective control and ability to shut down caster's concentration. All right, so at level 7, we're actually going to go into Sorcerer yet again, and we're actually going to get access to meta magic, and we're specifically going to be taking Quicken Spell, but more importantly, Subtle Spell meta magic. And you're probably thinking, wow, only 2 sorcery points at 7th level? You're going to not be able to use that very often. But the thing is, with how meta magic works now, with no action required whenever you cast a spell, you can sacrifice spell slots to gain sorcery points. You can't go over whatever your max sorcery point amount is though. But for example, at this level, I have 2 sorcery points. Quicken Spell meta magic costs 2 sorcery points. If I want to quicken spell a spell with not having any sorcery points, I can just consume a 2nd level spell slot and then I can cast whatever spell I was planning to cast quickened. And Subtle Spell being only 1 sorcery point, anytime I cast a spell and I want it to be subtle, as long as I have a 1st level spell slot, I can do it. And then we're going to go 4 levels into Wizard. And then that makes us at level 11. But before I go into the DPR, I want to go back to D&D Beyond and just analyze all the choices we're making. All right, so I picked those meta magic options. We also get a bit more spells. I went ahead and picked Featherfall, Detect Magic. And then, again, this is just my prepared spells. But there's this awkward thing with the Abjuration Wizard where at 10th level, you get Counterspell and Dispel Magic always prepared for you, and you essentially get the spells for free. But that's at level 10, and at level 5 is when you gain access to those spells, so we're gonna take them. But we now have Counterspell and Dispel Magic, which are very important to this build. So I forgot to mention the Counterspell differences, so I'll go through those real quickly. So I'll read the 2014 Counterspell. So it says, you attempt to interrupt a creature in the process of casting a spell. If the creature is casting a spell of 3rd level or lower, its spell fails and has no effect. If it is casting a spell of 4th level or higher, make an ability check using your spellcasting ability. The DC equals 10 plus the spell's level. On a success, the creature's spell fails and has no effect. When you cast this spell using a spell slot of 4th level or higher, the interrupted spell has no effect if its level is less than or equal to the level of the spell slot you used. So Counterspell was very good in 2014 because not only could you essentially counter any spell, but let's say, for example, you're countering a 9th level spell with a 3rd level spell slot, you could still potentially do it as long as you roll high enough. The DC would be 19, so you'd only have to roll around a 14 or 15, depending on your spell ability modifier, to be able to successfully counterspell a 9th level spell with a 3rd level spell slot. But this is the new version of Counterspell. You attempt to interrupt a creature in the process of casting a spell. The creature makes a Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, the spell dissipates with no effect, and the action, bonus action, or reaction used to cast it is wasted. If that spell was cast with the spell slot, the slot isn't expended. So the new version of Counterspell, it's now based on the person you're counterspelling's Constitution saving throw. So it's just like making a Constitution save to maintain concentration on a spell. But the DC, of course, being based off of the person casting its spell save DC. So depending on the person you're counterspelling, there's a higher chance that they'll be able to succeed than in the past. Also, their spell slot will not be used. Also, I forgot to mention this, in the 2014 version it says, which you take when you see a creature within 60 feet of you casting a spell. And the 2024 counterspell is a bit more specific where it says, which you take when you see a creature within 60 feet of yourself casting a spell with vertical, somatic, or material components. Also, you wouldn't know this just by reading these spell differences, but in 2014 rules, because Counterspell is a reaction, let's say you cast Fireball and a different caster counterspelled you, because you still have your reaction available, you could use your reaction to counterspell the counterspell, and then your Fireball would still go off. But with the new rules, you can only use 1 spell slot per turn. So if you're casting Fireball with a spell slot and someone counterspells your Fireball, using Counterspell yourself would require using a spell slot. So you would not be able to do that anymore. But let's say it's not your turn, it's one of your friend's turns, and they're being counterspelled. You can still counterspell a counterspell in that situation. So that's just very important to keep in mind about how Counterspell is very different now in the 2024 rules. I'm also going to pick up Fireball for obvious reasons. We're actually going to pick up Spirit Shroud. I am refusing to use Conjure Minor Elementals in any of my build videos. So even though the wizard gets access to Conjure Minor Elementals, I'm not going to be using it for any of my builds. But if your table has a homebrew version of Conjure Minor Elementals, or if your table is just fine with using Conjure Minor Elementals, anytime I mention using Spirit Shroud for this build, just replace it with Conjure Minor Elementals in your mind. Banishment for obvious reasons. If you would just want to get rid of a caster, boom, banish. And then Autoluke's Resilient Sphere. Basically, you can make someone immune to all damage, but they also can't do much. Or you can put an enemy in this as well. Again, Disintegrate. If the person you're fighting has Disintegrate though, they can get out of it. I think this would be good to use on like an NPC that you don't want harmed, or if things are really bad, you can just cast it on yourself, and so yeah, you won't take any damage. And then Wall of Fire. The reason I took Wall of Fire is we don't have access to 5th level spells yet, and Wall of Fire does decent damage, but it also blocks line of sight. And that's really good to use against casters. Spells I didn't put on my spell list but are in the spell book. We have Hypnotic Pattern, Non-Detection. This is obvious. This will be good so that casters can't track you with divination magic. Slow is great. Dimension Door, Evolved Black Tentacles, and Polymorph. Also, Blink is decent if you want to bamf out randomly. Not very consistent, but yeah, if you just want to not take damage between turns, it can do that for you. Oh yeah, one thing I forgot to mention at level 6 is our Arcane Ward is at 11 HP, and so that's pretty decent. At level 5 Wizard, we get Memorize Spell. Whenever you finish a short rest, you can study your spell book and replace one of the level 1 plus Wizard spells you have prepared for your spellcasting feature with another level 1 plus spell from the book. So yeah, you can switch out spells, which is nice during a short rest. And then Projected Ward. When a creature that you see within 30 feet of yourself takes damage, you can take a reaction to cause your Arcane Ward to absorb the damage. If this damage reduces the ward to 0 hit points, the warded creature takes any remaining damage. If that creature has any resistances or vulnerabilities, apply them before reducing the ward's hit points. So this is great. Not only can you protect your allies, but if they have any resistances, it applies to the ward. And at this level, our Arcane Ward is at a base of 20, which is pretty good. All right, before I go any further, I want to show you the Mage stat block. I'm using 5e.tools. Some of the things to point out about this stat block, it doesn't have a con saving throw proficiency at all. And then it has shield and counterspell. But then also, this is something that I think we really need to keep in mind when fighting spellcasters with the 2025 Monster Manual. This ability right here, Arcane Burst. It's a melee or ranged attack roll. So getting in melee with the caster doesn't really do much. It's a +6 to hit, reach 5 feet or a range of 120 feet. And it does 3d10 force damage. Almost impossible to get immunity to that. But then this is a very important thing. Multi-attack. The mage makes 3 Arcane Burst attacks. So for the level 11 DPR, I'm actually going to be using the Archmage stat block because it's a CR 11 creature. But just keep in mind, if the mage has Arcane Burst, the Archmage definitely will. Ooh, that's pretty scary too. 16 average damage 3 times is almost 50 damage. So yeah, if you're fighting a mage with the 2025 Monster Manual, you probably want to kill it quickly. All right, so for the level 11 DPR, we're going against the Archmage or the Archmage, however you want to pronounce it. I said earlier it's a 11 challenge rating, but it's actually a 12 challenge rating. Surprisingly, it only has a +1 to con saves. I could see this changing in the 2025 Monster Manual, but this is 2014. It also has magic resistance, which means it has advantage on saving throws against spells. It doesn't have resistance to spells though. So if you're fighting an Archmage, you want to be doing attack rolls more than saving throws. Also, even though this is a CR 12 creature, it has 9th level spells. So yeah, it has access to Time Stop. It also has Mind Blank, Stone Skin, and Mage Armor assumed to already be cast on it. Mind Blank makes you immune to psychic damage, so we don't want to be using Tasha's Mind Whip. Stone Skin gives it resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. And then Mage Armor makes its AC 15, and it has access to Shield. So for the DPR, I'm going to assume it is casting Shield every round. So its AC is going to be 20. It also has access to Globe of Invulnerability. And the new Globe of Invulnerability, and this might have also been the case with the old Globe of Invulnerability, but basically any spells that try to hurt it outside of its 10-foot emanation are not able to hurt it. But if we go within 10 feet of it, we can do whatever we want. And we're actually going to be trying to utilize the Spirit Shroud spell, so we definitely want to be within 10 feet of it anyway. At this level, we're going to be using magic weapon at level 3, which will make our hand crossbow a +2 hand crossbow. And then with the archery fighting style, it gives it a +12 to hit when we true strike, and that's 3d6 +6 damage. So in round 1, we're going to try to get within 10 feet of the Archmage. We're going to bonus action cast Spirit Shroud. I would do radiant damage just because it's very rarely resisted. And then we're going to do our true strike, which is also radiant damage. And that'll do an average of 17.5 DPR if we're assuming that the caster is reaction casting shield. And then I have 2 separate DPRs for the next few rounds. One where we're casting subtle spell every single round, assuming that the Archmage will want to counterspell us. And then I have an entirely separate DPR, which is where we're quickening spell every turn, assuming the Archmage is not casting counterspell on us. So after round 1, for round 2, 3, and 4, if we're using subtle spell, we're going to be casting Scorching Ray, subtle spell, meta magic with Spirit Shroud up for all 3 rounds. And then if we're using quicken spell, we're going to be quickening spell, Scorching Ray every turn at the highest level slot we have, and then action true striking. The subtle spell DPR is 36.3. The quicken spell DPR is 49.5. So pretty decent at this level. It just depends on what we're doing. Also, we have 5th level spell slots at this level. So the first Scorching Ray we end up doing is going to be 6 attacks. So whatever spell they're concentrating on, they're probably not concentrating on it anymore. And every turn after that's going to be 5 attacks. And then if we're using quicken spell, it's going to be an extra attack, you know, with the true strike. And just if you're curious about how much spell slots we'll be using if we quicken spell every turn, first round we have 2 sorcery points, so we can just use those. We have 3 second level spell slots that we're not specifically using for anything. Those can all be used to cast quicken spell 3 turns in a row, and that's level 11. I also totally forgot to mention, at level 8 wizard, level 11 character, we took Warcaster. This bumps up our intelligence to 18. This makes it so that if we have an opportunity attack, we can cast a spell as a reaction, and we can also perform thematic components of spells even if our hands are full, which is nice. All right, at level 12, we're going to be going back into Sorcerer. This is for a couple reasons. We want to get that ability score improvement or feat at level 4 Sorcerer, so we're actually going to be taking 2 levels into Sorcerer. And because we're going into level 3 Sorcerer, we're going to get access to a Sorcerer subclass. And I actually decided to go with the Divine Soul Sorcerer. One of the obvious reasons for this is we get access to cleric spells. And even though our charisma isn't very high, it's not terrible at a 14, but we're mostly going for healing spells. And one thing that changed about most healing spells with the 2024 rules is healing spells for some reason used to be categorized as evocation spells, but now with the new rules, they're actually categorized as abjuration spells. So anytime we heal with Healing Word or Cure Wounds, which we're going to be picking up at this level, we're going to be able to add hit points to our Arcane Ward, which is really nice. And with Healing Word and Cure Wounds being buffed as well, they're much more beneficial to cast. Not only do we get access to cleric spells, we also get 2nd level sorcerer spells, and then we also get Favored by the Gods. Favored by the Gods makes it so that we can add 2d4 to a saving throw once per short or long rest. With our advantage on intelligence, charisma, and wisdom saves, with our Mage Slayer, basically legendary resistance on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saves per short and long rest, plus the extra 2d4 added with Favored by the Gods to a saving throw once per short or long rest, we're going to be succeeding on so many saving throws that other characters would not. And then level 4, we're going to be taking our ability score improvement, and it's going to be the Shield Master feat. This is actually one of the main reasons I did a 1 level dip of Fighter. First of all, 1 level dip of Fighter gave us access to a higher armor class with our medium armor proficiency and shields. But one of the saving throws I didn't really have a solution to was dexterity saving throws. My dex is decent at a 14, but if I fail a dex save, it's going to be real bad. But what Shield Master does, it does 2 things. It has a shield bash ability, which isn't going to be very helpful for us for this build because our strength is very low, and it specifically uses our strength modifier. But the interposed shield, if you're subject to an effect that allows you to make a dexterity saving throw to only take half damage, you can take a reaction to take no damage if you succeed on the saving throw and are holding a shield. So we basically get evasion light. If we fail the saving throw, we're still going to take full damage, but if we succeed the saving throw, instead of taking half damage, we're just going to take no damage at all. At later levels, we're going to be succeeding on almost all saving throws, I would say. So this will be nice to take no damage when you would normally take half. And then we go to level 9 wizard, level 10 wizard, and at level 10, we get Spellbreaker. This is one of the abilities that I've been specifically seeking out. This is one of the best abilities to counter spellcasters. I'll go ahead and read it for you. So it says, Spellbreaker, level 10, you always have the counterspell and dispel magic spells prepared. Okay, that's fine. In addition, you can cast dispel magic as a bonus action, and you can add your proficiency bonus to its ability check. When you cast either spell with a spell slot, that slot isn't expended if the spell fails to stop a spell. Oh my gosh. We're going to be counterspelling all the time, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. We're going to be dispelling magic as a bonus action all the time. It's going to be great. And then at level 11, and then we go wizard 11, and then we go wizard 12, and we get another ability score improvement. We're going to just get our intelligence to 20. So +2 to intelligence. Our intelligence is now maxed out, but now I'm going to go back to D&D Beyond, and I'm going to go over the spell options, because there's a lot of spells I picked up between level 11 and 17 that I really need to go over. First of all, when you pick divine magic, you specifically pick an affinity. I'm going to pick good so I can get cure wounds, and then we're going to pick up healing word, aid, prayer of healing, and oddly enough, wizards don't get access to silence. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to pick it up till pretty late in the game, but we have the level 2 spell Silence. For the duration, no sound can be created within or pass through a 20-foot radius sphere centered on a point you choose within range. Any creature or object entirely inside the sphere has immunity to thunder damage, and creatures have the deafening condition when entirely inside. Casting a spell that includes a verbal component is impossible there. And as you guys know, tons of spells have verbal components. Also, there isn't really that many caster enemies that are sorcerers. So there's not a lot of spellcasters that I've fought, at least, or that I've seen in the monster manual, that can use subtle spell. But you can use subtle spell. So what you could even do is you could cast silence on you and a caster that you're fighting, but then you can cast spells all you want, and they're going to be limited to spells that don't have a verbal component. This also helps if you use something like the trident to topple them, or you have a melee character that grapples them or something, because Misty Step has a verbal component. So they can't just Misty Step away from a grapple. Silence, level 2 spell, very underrated in my opinion. All right, remember, this is just the prepared spells I have for this level, but since level 11, we got access to 5th level spells, and we also got access to 6th level spells. So these are not all the spells I would take. These are just some of the ones that I think are very important. So first of all, we have Circle of Power. Circle of Power is really nice, especially when you want to help your allies. It's very Paladin-esque. It's available on the Paladin spell list, so that's probably why. It's also available on the Cleric spell list, I'm pretty sure, but I'll go ahead and read it. 5th level Abjuration, concentration up to 10 minutes. An aura radiates from you in a 30-foot emanation for the duration. While in the aura, you and your allies have advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. That is all saving throws and magical effects. When an affected creature makes a saving throw against a spell or magical effect that allows a save to take only half damage, it takes no damage if it succeeds on the save. So that's great. I don't include this in the DPR, but in actual play, I think I would be casting Circle of Power a ton in spellcaster situations, that is, of course. Great defensive option for you and your allies. And then Wall of Force for obvious reasons. Of course, if the spellcaster has Disintegrate, they can melt your Wall of Force, but for that exact same reason, we are wanting to take Disintegrate. Disintegrate not only does amazing damage, but it is one of the only counters to spells like Wall of Force and Force Gauge, which are very powerful spells that you'll want to be able to counter. And then Fizban's Platinum Shield. This is a really good defensive option and also protecting your allies spell. You essentially, as a bonus action, you can give a creature half cover, which I'm pretty sure is +2 to AC. You can give them resistance to acid, cold, fire, lightning, and poison damage, which is nice to have, and you give them evasion, and then you can move it to different creatures as a bonus action on every turn. So this is a nice defensive option. I feel like Circle of Power you're going to want to use if you're a lot closer to your allies, or when you have a lot of allies really close together, whereas Fizban's Platinum Shield is when you want to protect a specific ally or you want to protect yourself. Also, because it mostly raises your AC and gives you resistance to damage types, it's going to be more when you're fighting something that is doing elemental damage, whereas whereas Circle of Power will be like, you know, saving throw effects. Help you more in that situation. But then I want to talk about Jalarzi's Storm of Radiance. This is a brand new spell, and it is on the Warlock spell list, and I feel like Warlocks will probably talk about this spell more because they have access to less spells, but I think this spell is very, very good. It has a few hiccups with it because it doesn't really have a way to keep creatures inside of it on its own. So this is a spell you're going to want to plan well, maybe have another way to trap a creature. I'm actually going to be using that in one of the DPR calculations I have for this DPR breakdown, but this is a very good counter to spellcasters as long as you can prevent them from moving. I'll go ahead and read it. It is a 5th level evocation spell, concentration up to a minute, 120-foot range. It is a con saving throw, unfortunately. You unleash a storm of flashing light and raging thunder in a 10-foot radius, 40-foot high cylinder, centered on a point you can see within range. While in this area, creatures have the blinded and deafened conditions, and they can't cast spells with a verbal component. So it blinds and deafens them and gives them basically the effects of silence. And then, when the storm appears, each creature in it makes a Constitution saving throw, taking 2d10 radiant damage and 2d10 thunder damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. A creature also makes this save when it enters the spell's area for the first time on its turn or ends there. A creature makes this save only once per turn. But here's the kicker. This upcast is actually really good. It says the radiant and thunder damage increased by 1d10 for each spell slot level above 5th. The radiant and thunder damage. That means it is a plus 2d10 for every upcast, and it already does 4d10. That's a very good upcast, and because I just mentioned that Jalarzi's Storm of Radiance is the most good when you can keep creatures within it, I would go back and make sure to pick up Rhyme's Binding Ice. I talked about Rhyme's Binding Ice in my last build, but it's just a really good spell in general, and this is a way to potentially keep spellcasters within your Storm of Radiance. So I think this is a very good pickup, even though it's a level 2 spell. You can upcast it, their speed will be reduced to 0, and if you can shut down a spellcaster's action or prevent them from moving, that's really good in my book. All right, for the level 17 DPR, I'm fighting a very unique enemy. It is a fiend this is from Monsters of the Multiverse. It is a blue wait, what?
Blue Abishai.
Did you guys hear that? Yeah, it's that. However you pronounce that. It's a fiend, but it looks like a dragon. It has an AC of 19, which is pretty beefy. Its con saving throw is only a +3. So what I've noticed is it seems most spellcasters don't actually have that high of a con until you get into CR 20, and then it's insane. But that being said, they have a lot of really crazy attacks. They don't have shield, but they have a 19 AC base, so that makes sense. They don't have Counterspell either, but they do have Dispel Magic. They also have Greater Invisibility, Wall of Force, and then they have a really strong Lightning Strike spell attack that does 8d8, and they can do 3 of them. So they're inflicting a lot of lightning damage. This might be a situation where you use Fizban's Platinum Shield, upping the AC and giving you resistance to lightning damage. But we have a problem. So up until now, we've been doing a lot of Scorching Rays. But this caster is immune to fire, lightning, and poison damage, and the poison condition, and has resistance to cold damage. So we can't do any fire damage to it, and cold damage, it would have resistance. It also doesn't have Misty Step, but it has its own bonus action called Teleport, which is basically Misty Step, and it requires sight to use. It also just has normal dark vision. Your character is probably not going to know all this information, but maybe if you prepared, or with your expertise in Arcana and a 20 intelligence, maybe you'll be able to figure things out. Maybe you'll have a hunter ranger in your party and he'll be able to tell you what the immunities and resistances are. We're actually going to be having 2 different damage scenarios. One is using Storm of Radiance and Rhyme's Binding Ice, and yes, I know he's resistant to cold damage, but it's okay. More for the effect anyway. We have another one using Scorching Ray and Spirit Shroud, because even though he's immune to fire damage, he can still get hit with Scorching Ray, and when we have Spirit Shroud up, it'll still do damage to him. So let's do the Storm of Radiance one first. So round 1, we bonus action quicken Storm of Radiance, and then we True Strike, and then every turn after that, we quicken Rhyme's Binding Ice and True Strike. We're using whatever our highest level spell slot is for Rhyme's Binding Ice, and then Rhyme's Binding Ice makes it so that he has a higher chance to not leave the storm, but the chance is definitely not 0 for sure. But I could see you having party members helping, and there's tons of ways to push creatures back into things. So let's assume that they're staying in the Storm of Radiance and you're casting Rhymes Binding Ice every turn. They can't cast verbal component spells, they are blinded, and they're taking a ton of damage every round. By the way, it's 8th level Storm of Radiance. So the 4-round DPR for Storm of Radiance and Rhymes Binding Ice is 87.2 DPR. Rhymes Binding Ice had a 75% chance of working, by the way. So that's a pretty good chance for him to be stuck in the ice. The DPR for Scorching Ray and Spirit Shroud with the fire immunity is actually still 64 DPR. The reason is we're making so many attacks. That's an 8th level Scorching Ray doing 9 attacks with fire immunity, but you're doing that radiant damage or necrotic damage with Spirit Shroud and doing 9 attacks. So it adds up still. That's also 9 Constitution saving throws at disadvantage if he's concentrating on a spell. And then we lowered the spell slots every round, so it's a little less every round, but it ends up being, like I said, 64 DPR. Now let's say you're in a situation where you're fighting a similar creature that doesn't have fire immunity. You're going to be doing 93.9 DPR with Spirit Shroud and Scorching Ray. Again, remember, round 1, you bonus action Spirit Shroud, True Strike, and then you go into the Scorching Rays in rounds after that. So all around, if it doesn't have fire immunity, almost reaching 100 DPR is pretty good at this level. And this might be a reason why you want to have Transmute Spell instead of Quicken Spell or Subtle Spell. It just depends on what you're going for. All right, so level 18, 19, and 20, we're going to be going all into Wizard, and that'll make us a level 15 Wizard. But at level 14 Wizard, we get the Abjuration Wizard's Capstone, and that is Spell Resistance. It says you have advantage on all saving throws against spells, and you have resistance to the damage of all spells. That's really good. You already had advantage on the mental saving throws, but this makes it so you have advantage on all saving throws. And then you also get resistance to all spell damage. This is really nice. So you essentially get magic resistance plus. And I want to go over the spell list right now because there is a decent amount of spells that we get access to now. So I didn't mention this in the last spell breakdown, but I'm definitely going to have Tasha's Otherworldly Guise as an option. The main reason why is this makes you immune to 2 damage types. It could be radiant or necrotic, or it could be fire or poison. Then you gain a flying speed, you get a +2 bonus to AC, and then basically you can make 2 weapon attacks and you can use your spellcasting modifier. Why would I want this? Well, sometimes you're going to be fighting things, especially at these high levels, or weapon attacks will be better than any spells you can cast. And even though this is still using magic in a way, it'll be nice to be able to fly around, shoot your hand crossbow a couple times, use your weapon masteries a bit more, and also the immunity to fire, poison, necrotic, or radiant. That's really good. For the level 20 DPR, I'm going to be fighting a Lich, and so you might want to get the necrotic damage immunity. That might be nice. You also get access to Force Cage. Force Cage is not as good as it used to be because it now requires concentration, but it's still better to have than not have, in my opinion. It could still be very useful. And then Anti-Magic Field. Anti-Magic Field, I've seen a lot of the debates online. Now it is an emanation spell, and so it moves with you. This basically makes you immune to all magical effects, but you also can't cast spells out of this. But this will be good if you really want to not take any damage at all. And because it's a 10-foot emanation, you can make it so your friends are in this as well. This feels like the oh shit, I need to run ability, but those are nice to have every once in a while. I've heard some people say online that there is some cheesy things you can do with it where an emanation doesn't have to surround you, but it can only affect things like 10 feet away from you. But I don't know about that. I think that's weird. Also though, based on looking at the Lich stat block, I also decided to pick up Bigby's Hand. And Befuddlement is also a spell you might want to take. If a creature fails this, they'll take a ton of psychic damage, they can't cast any spells, and they can't take any magic actions for 30 days unless someone else casts Greater Restoration, Heal, or Wish on them. Great spell to use against a caster. Yeah, there's a lot of spells I have on here that I'm not going to talk about all of them, but Bar Step is great if you don't want to use Disintegrate and you want to get out of a Force Cage. Contingency, I forgot to mention this as well. You got this a bit earlier. I would put a spell like Cure Wounds on here, or like any healing spell, because you can do a 5th level spell as a cast time of an action. What if when your HP gets to half, Contingency casts Cure Wounds at 5th level? I did the math. It does close to 40 healing, and then because it's a 5th level spell, it'll add 10 to your Arcane Ward because it's an Abjuration spell. So you can give yourself basically 50 healing automatically when your HP goes down to half. I feel like that's a pretty simple contingency. There's probably really creative contingencies you could do with a anti-mage, but that's the only one I came up with. Synaptic Static is great because if they fail, they subtract 1d6 from all attack rolls and ability checks, and they also subtract 1d6 from any Constitution saving throws to maintain concentration on spells for 1 minute, and it doesn't require concentration, that effect. But against the Lich, I specifically am going to be using Bigby's Hand. The main reason why is, let's just look at the Lich stat block and I can show you why. So first of all, they have a lot of legendary resistances. So you want to be doing attack rolls. But they also have cold, lightning, and necrotic resistance. They're immune to poison damage. They actually don't have magic resistance. They just have their legendary resistances. So those will run out eventually if you're persistent enough, but they have a plus 10 Constitution saving throw. And so the reason why I picked Bigby's Hand is not so much because it's not going to be taking fire damage, but because to be able to break a Lich's concentration on a spell, even at disadvantage, you have to be doing more than 20 damage per hit. Because if you don't know, the DC for maintaining concentration is 10 or half of the damage you take, whatever is higher. And Bigby's Hand does some pretty big hits. And then you also can use Bigby's Hand as a bonus action after you cast it initially. Not only that, but we concentrate on Bigby's Hand and then we can, as an action, cast Disintegrate. And I know I just said it has 3 legendary resistances, so you probably don't want to be using saving throw spells against them, but Disintegrate hits really hard. And this here Lich only has a plus 3 to its dexterity, and that's the saving throw that Disintegrate uses. So in 3 rounds, if it fails, it's going to be using its 3 legendary resistances on that. And if that's the case, that's really good. You got 3 legendary resistances gone. And if they don't use their legendary resistance, then they're going to be taking a ton of damage. So we're doing 9th level Bigby's Hand. And remember, the Lich's AC is 17, and I'm going to be assuming it's casting shield every turn. So I'm going to have the AC be 22, which is a very high AC. So the DPR is going to be a little bit lower because the AC is so high, but Bigby's Hand at 9th level does 32.2 DPR, and that's as a bonus action using the attacking ability. And then we don't need to be using Quicken Spell because we already have a use of our bonus action with Bigby's Hand. So we're going to be casting Subtle Spell every single time because Lich's Counterspell. So we don't want to be counterspelled. So round 1, action Bigby's Hand. Then round 2 to 4 is bonus action Bigby's Hand, action Disintegrate. If for some reason it doesn't use its legendary resistance, just so you guys can kind of get the idea of the damage we're doing, that is 80.3 DPR. Now let's say it's not concentrating on anything crazy and you just want to do damage to it. Then we're going to go back to our Scorching Ray Spirit Shroud strategy, and that's going to be 90.3 DPR. Keep in mind though, Spirit Shroud at the highest level that we're casting it at, with True Strike now, with our magic weapon cast on it, by itself True Strike with Spirit Shroud on it does 31.6 DPR, which is going to be hitting harder than a single Scorching Ray. So if you're just trying to break concentration and you don't want to use too many resources, the Spirit Shroud True Strike 30-something damage, that's like a 15 DC to maintain concentration. With the plus 10, still will probably save, but that's just one strategy. Disintegrate though, doing often 100 damage. If it hits, it'll definitely break concentration. That being said though, at level 20, if we cast 8 at 5th level, we have 124 base HP. Our Arcane Ward is 35 HP. It's not temporary hit points, so if you have temporary hit points from another source like an ally, then you can add temporary hit points onto that. So we're relatively beefy for a wizard sorcerer multiclass. We have at this point for sure half plate, so our AC is a 19. We have advantage on all saving throws against magic. We take half damage from all spells. We have a plus 5 intelligence saving throw, a plus 8 charisma saving throw, a plus 7 constitution saving throw. We can counterspell without consuming a spell slot if it doesn't work. We can bonus action dispel magic. We can protect our allies with Arcane Ward as a reaction. We can cast spells that'll make our allies safer from spells. We can cast subtle spell meta magic to not be counterspelled ourselves, which a wizard normally can't do by themselves. I feel like this build takes the best of Abjuration Wizard and adds enough of Sorcerer to sort of make the things that make Sorcerer stand out as an anti-mage, and adds it to a wizard to make a great combo that's very effective in battle. If I was a spellcaster, I would be terrified of this character. I hope you enjoyed the video. I love making these videos. If there's anything I missed or anything that you think would make this build better, go ahead ahead and let me know down in the comments. Watch whatever video the feed recommends. Also, the day that this video drops, YJ and I, YJ is my wife, we will be playing Baldur's Gate 3 on stream. You can watch it here on YouTube or you can watch it on Twitch. We're most likely going to be starting around 7 p.m. CST. So get ready for that. It'll be a lot of fun. YJ is very chaotic and she hasn't played the full game, and I'm gonna let her lead the playthrough. So get ready for some craziness. All right, thank you guys so much. You have a great new year and see you in 2025. Peace.